Through OT Potential, we've released over 70 courses, all exploring new and influential occupational therapy research. And as we enter 2024, it is time to reflect on that research and ask, what trends are we seeing in OT? And what do these trends mean for the logistics of your day-to-day OT practice? In today's course, we'll talk about new trends with a particular focus on what commonalities we see leaders in our field doing during their occupational therapy process. And we'll culminate our discussion by exploring how people describe OT. For this exploration, I am so thankful to welcome back to the podcast two of our podcast hosts from 2023, Carlin Reaume OTD, OTRL, and Ryan Lavalley, PhD, OTRL. Together, we'll unpack what all of these trends mean for your OT practice. Welcome to the OT Potential Podcast, where we review new and influential OT journal articles. Then invite on expert guests to help us pull out actionable takeaways that you can implement in your practice starting today. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Lyon, OTRL. And before we dive into this big topic of what is OT in 2024, I wanted to let you know that this podcast may qualify as continuing education for you. You are probably listening to this podcast on a free podcast platform, but to gain CEU credit, you will need to be a member of the OT Potential Club, our OT continuing education platform. So bearing in mind that this could count as a CEU course, I wanted to state our two learning objectives so you can be thinking about them throughout the podcast today. Our first learning objective is you will be able to identify research-based OT trends in goal setting. Our second is you will be able to recognize trends within the research related to OT intervention. Since today's episode is a special focus on overarching trends, we won't be reviewing a single article, but I do want to highlight that our discussion is rooted in one of this year's top articles. And that article is the Occupational Therapy Practice Framework, Domain and Process, 4th edition. This article was published in the American Journal of Occupational Therapy in 2020, and this article ranks 7th on this year's list of the 100 most influential OT articles. So even though we won't be breaking down this article on today's episode, I definitely encourage you to go back and read this or read it for the first time. Such a great overview of occupational therapy and all that entails. But like I just mentioned, this article was published in 2020 and the world continues to evolve so much each year. We're definitely seeing new trends and exciting things are happening in OT. And I'm just so thankful to be welcoming today's guest to talk about 2023 and look ahead to 2024. Our first guest is Dr. Carlin Reaume. Carlin is a pelvic floor therapist in Sacramento, California. Carlin also serves as an assistant clinical professor for the Doctor of Occupational Therapy program at the University of the Pacific in Sacramento. She also serves on the leadership team for the OT Association of California. Carlin has more than 15 years of experience as a therapist and an educator. Utilizing her clinical expertise in lifestyle redesign, she has focused her career on expanding occupational therapy's role in non-traditional and emerging practice areas, including workplace wellness, college student health, and maternal health. She holds specialty certifications in perinatal mental health through Postpartum Support International and pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise through Core Exercise Solutions. Dr. Reaume is also a registered yoga teacher and a certified postpartum doula. Carlin launched her business Supported Mama Pelvic Floor Therapy in 2020 as a way to provide holistic support for women on the journey before, during, and after pregnancy. And our other guest is Dr. Ryan Lavalley. Ryan is an assistant professor of occupational science in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Medicine. Dr. Lavalley has nearly 10 years of experience in community practice of occupational therapy. Broadly, his practice and research sits at the intersections of aging, housing, and anti-oppression. He is the primary lead for the department's Community Practice Lab and has experience conducting community program development and evaluation in partnership with multiple partners, including nonprofits, local governments, and community institutions. He is also the director of the UNC Chapel Hill's Partnership in Aging program, an initiative of the Provost's office to facilitate communication and collaboration among campus and community partners working in aging. His research has explored collective processes of everyday life and the sociological implications of doing together in community, including both positive outcomes such as language inclusion and negative outcomes such as racism. Like I said, I'm so thankful that both Carlin and Ryan are joining us today. And without further ado, I will patch them into our podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Carlin and Ryan. It's great to have you. Before we get going, I'm going to have you both introduce yourselves so we can hear your name and get oriented to your voice before we begin the conversation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Lavalley, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in our Division of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carlin Reaume. I am also an assistant professor. I'm at the University of the Pacific in Sacramento, California. I'm also a private practice owner specializing in pelvic health and maternal wellness. So really happy to be here to speak with both of you today.
I am just so thankful that you are both here for this conversation. This podcast feels like it's been a long time coming for me. I've done 70 different podcast episodes where we've gone through different research. And I have just started to feel like there are these trends that keep coming up over and over about occupational therapy. And they're not really the trends that I expected. And honestly, they are not what I was doing when I was practicing. And I really wanted to create some space to just talk about them explicitly and talk about them like in this moment in time as we head into 2024. Like, are these the paths we should be going down? Am I even on the right track? And I was like, I need to run these by some of just the smartest OTs I know who have been on the podcast before. So thank you for being and just having this big conversation. We're headed into 2024, but I wanted to start the podcast by just reflecting on 2023 and starting with like what surprised you, what was on your mind last year, thinking about our profession.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I found myself feeling really excited and inspired with the momentum that continues to grow around my specific areas of clinical practice related to pelvic health, maternal health, supporting people as they transition into parenthood, all of that. We had some exciting wins with acknowledgement from the AOTA and establishing a community of practice where people continue to come together to talk about the variety of challenges that people experience with pelvic floor dysfunction and how we can continue to move the conversation forward. And so just kind of seeing the grassroots efforts and the way that the movement is building, it just really feels exciting to me. And I was kind of, it was surprising kind of how exponentially quickly maybe, I don't know if quick is the word, but I feel like this is a year where, some of those issues have come to the forefront in an exciting way. Similarly, my clinical background has been in a lot of prevention and wellness. We continue to talk about our role in lifestyle management. Occupational therapy practitioners are continuing to push boundaries in that area as well, and getting more positions and advocating for roles in primary care settings. So I've been seeing that and feeling that, and that's really exciting. And another community of practice that was started within the AOTA was around lifestyle management. So I feel excited about all of those pieces and a bit surprised pleasantly. And then lastly, given my role, I'm the advocacy chair for our state professional association here in California. And so I think through the nature of my role, people have really been seeking out some support and guidance around all things advocacy. And from my perspective, it feels like there are increasing numbers of practitioners and students who really want to get involved in making powerful changes. And so that has been, again, like a really inspiring, exciting, kind of heartwarming piece of kind of my personal professional picture over 2023 I feel excited about.
And I think mine jumps off of that in a lot of ways because I've been very excited but also surprised by how many OTs practitioners are really willing to jump out of some of the traditional models that we've seen and really think through sort of an entrepreneurial spirit and think about ways that an occupational perspective or even the therapeutic tools that we bring to the table can be used in really interesting ways that might even step outside of the healthcare model and think more in the business model or nonprofit models or even community level practice and thinking about those things. That's sort of the realm that I tend to be paying attention to most. But lots of really wonderful conversations, both internationally. I think has also surprised me how many more international conversations are happening, because of the virtual world that we're sort of tending to live in a little bit more now. But seeing so many practitioners communicating across lakes and ponds and seas and oceans to really hear different ways of practice and sort of taking ideas and making them grow in their own spaces. But also thinking about like OT in real estate and OT in all these different places that you didn't necessarily expect OT to go. But I finally feel like OTs are ready to step out and say, this is our superpower and this is how we want to apply it. And that means we get to go into these places and explore and expand the ways that we can really use our skills. And so we're seeing OTs take that leap and not necessarily listen to some of the people who want to put it into a box. And so I've seen that's really inspired me, but also surprised me in a really exciting way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like our just like energy and passion in OT is showing up in different ways than it ever has. Like, I think you could look at like our national membership numbers or even our state, and those can feel like, are they declining? Are we losing energy in our collective action? But it feels like that passion is just showing up in different ways that I can't even like quite articulate or wrap my mind around yet, but it's definitely there and it's definitely tangible. Yeah, I can't wait to see what that looks like headed into 2024.
I might add a little bit of a negative Nancy perspective here in this moment. Just in the sense that I think it's passion, but I also, unfortunately, think it's a little bit of desperation. I think that OTs, OT practitioners across the board are finding it a little bit more difficult to find positions that they want to stay in for really long periods of time. They're not getting paid as much as they would like to be being paid. And there's so many more graduates now that it's there's so many more OT programs out there, and students are managing student loan debt. And so I think we're thinking and using our OT skills to broaden and expand and be passionate about what we went to school for, but out of necessity because there's not always the positions available in some instances that people really want to stick in or manage. And so just thinking about sort of supply and demand of positions for OTs out there, I think has really also contributed to sort of the expansion of roles and sort of innovative thinking so that people can practice OT the way they want to and really enjoy.
I'm going to go ahead and then add a positive spin. Not that was particularly negative, but I think that there's something that I've noted just being in academia and just seeing generations of students move through. I think there's a shift just around the way people are approaching certain problems, different research, like technologies, ways of doing things, like social media, for better or for worse. There are all these different kind of opportunities available, ways to approach problems that I'm noticing in the students that I work with, where I think that there has been some innovation and some new perspectives shared that I just wouldn't have ever even, colleagues of mine, and people, mentors of mine probably wouldn't have even thought of in a way that's, I don't know, just fresh and new and not necessarily out of, desperation, but just kind of the way that they do things now or something. Mm-hmm. I'm sounding like I'm dating myself here. What the young kids are doing these days. I don't know.
Yeah, it feels like there's a degree of innovation because there has to be the partially because the world is changing, the systems as they were working before either aren't working as well or we're realizing, oh, they never really worked. I think that your practice area, Carlin, like really encapsulates that. Like people are realizing, oh, there's new needs for like private practice. There's new services that could be delivered, but also for OTs in traditional settings, like in acute care, there is so much innovation that has to happen to help around like that postnatal, prenatal time. Like we've missed the boat on there. And there's a huge societal need too. Like there's a need that we are realizing that we can rise to meet.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of this speaks to some of those systemic and like the broader picture influences that impact practice and impact positions available and, all of that. So I feel like it's two sides of the coin, right? There's a piece where pieces could feel overwhelming or hopeless, and then there's like, okay, well, where in that can I impact change, or how can I find my niche, or where can I press forward? So,
and I see so much hope from our students, and the students coming through are pushing, and we saw some really powerful student movements, in the last year, really thinking about how to have conversations that have been hard and difficult for our profession, and in thinking about advocacy and being advocates and moving some of that generational difference maybe forward. And I am also learning that I'm no longer just like a new graduate. And so like thinking about how we engage both in learning, but also in advocacy and the content of what we are teaching to students and what they want to be taught and how they want to be taught to be prepared to step out into the practice world as it is today, I think is really exciting. Students are taking it by the horns and really wanting to move the profession forward in a direction that feels comfortable and exciting for them, but also making sure that it holds itself accountable to the values that it professes as a discipline.
As I reflect back on the year, there was one like theme that really stood out to me, and it came through both of the research that we covered, but also how people were practicing. And like, that's unique to me. Like sometimes the research and how we practice do not always mesh. But for me, in both those areas, self-determination was just everywhere, and really holding that up for our clients. Like I think the models that we looked at in research really showed that, and how people are practicing really held that up too. I'm curious to hear, do you both see that as a theme? Like that to me is... yeah, that was the theme of the past year for me. Is that something that's been happening and I'm just catching up to? Am I making that up? Like, I just feel like it was everywhere. What do you two think?
I think in my areas of practice, that has been a theme that has been present. And, I've worked in less traditional settings like throughout my career. Now in the space of transitioning into parenthood, but prior to that was, college student transitioning, and very much that has been at the center of those conversations, because it's been preventative. It's been kind of outside of, I haven't been, for the most part, I haven't been billing insurance for services. And so there's been a bit of flexibility related to the whole therapeutic process, but it has been very much focused on self-determination in all ways, and supporting clients throughout that process. Definitely. So that doesn't feel new to me per se.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a bit, not radical is the wrong word, sort of like radical in the fun sense, like it's a radical self-determination. In that we, I think, are really challenging a little bit of the paternalization that therapy in general, not just OT, but just therapy in the medical world has had historically. And we're allowing some radical decisions to be made by the people that we're working alongside of in the therapeutic process, so that maybe they're uncomfortable for us as the therapeutic practitioner, but that is still their decision to make. And so I see students also really advocating for that and challenging some of the perspectives that have historically been taught in the classroom, but also, within the systems of field work and making decisions that are made for clients and patients. I think the challenge that I'm seeing is that we are teaching this, we're talking about it, we're pushing for it, but we're meeting systems that don't allow it. And so it really goes back to that question of advocacy and how I think a lot of OT practitioners are really seeing the need for systemic change and advocacy at levels across the health system as well as the social system, and being able to see that, just because the health system says these have to be the goals, it doesn't always have to work that way, but it takes energy and time and probably some emotional investment to really try and make some of those changes happen at an institutional level. And we can't be as maybe meek as we have in the past to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. As I'm thinking about this theme of self-determination and how it filters down to like our actual OT sessions, I saw these 4 themes that I just kind of wanted to say aloud and go through with each of you and talk about, is this the right track? Is this how we're heading? It seems like they come up again and again on the podcast. And again, it's different than how I practiced. And I guess starting with goal setting and just like that initial walking into the room, what I hear the really good clinicians say as I'm interviewing is they walk in and they ask open-ended questions and they have the clients set their own goals. And that is totally different than what I did in acute care. And that was not a system stopping me from doing that. That was myself and seeing myself as an expert that that was the barrier there. Is that what we should be doing? Like, is that the trend that we're going to? Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I just want to give you a little credit in that we can still blame a system, probably the educational system, on teaching you that approach.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, good, thank you.
But I think that is really true. That's the tension that we're coming up to, where we walk into the room and maybe even the nurses or the doctors say that this is the sort of change that needs to happen for this particular client. And then they say, well, actually, I'd like to be able to do this in my everyday, or I want to be able to, engage in this way or do this activity so that I can feel better. And that's not the intervention that was suggested to us or the type of change that was sort of designated by a health insurance company or something like that. And so I think we're running into that tension. And I think that's also why we see so many OTs thinking innovatively about stepping out into other practice areas where that sort of, not oversight, that's the wrong word, that sort of downward structure of power isn't as strong, or they get to make their own decisions that are rooted in their own values and principles when it comes to the practice. And so I really do think that is the way to do it. It's just really hard.
Mm-hmm. And the people I hear doing that the best are in traditional settings. Like they're in acute care, they're in outpatient, like they're figuring out how to make that work. Or maybe those are just the people I've talked to. And I think that's what like amazes me so much, because I'm like, those were the settings I was in and they're taking this totally different approach. Like, I think I was like client-centered, like, oh, I'm thinking about the client, but having a self-determined client, like, and having them set their own goals, that's totally different and sounds challenging, but much more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you bring all of these up, it makes me think a lot about motivational interviewing and just kind of some of the fundamental components of motivational interviewing. And I presume many people study this. I don't know that it's like a required component necessarily of occupational therapy education, but certainly a lot of students that I know are aware of it. We teach it, in courses here, and I've been exposed for quite a while. But the ability to ask those open-ended questions and reflect and just kind of engage in supporting people, meeting them where they're at, figuring out, what are they ready to move forward? In what way might they be ready to move forward, and supporting them to develop that intrinsic motivation And I think that is so critical for any kind of therapeutic progress, but also rapport to be established. And so I do see that as a really key piece. I feel like I've been lucky in the settings that I've been in, where that has felt comfortable to have a lot of open-ended questions and, client-directed goals and all of that. And as, a private practice owner, I'm setting it up. So that's how I get to do it. I do think it's interesting. And I encourage people to think about, how might they, if they're feeling limited by constraints in whatever setting they're in, is there a way that they can just start to maybe push this a little bit or, just make small changes? That's how I feel about all things advocacy and pushing forward. It's like you don't have to tackle the whole piece all at once, but is there some small step that you could take? I guess that's very OT of me, right? Like what's the next small step you might be able to take to move it forward?
Yeah.
Yeah. Along that same line of having those client set goals, as I'm having conversations with practitioners, I just hear such a dynamicism in how they approach each session then, that they really show up and they're like, what does the client need today? And I remember the Seagraves described that as like, as therapists, we're like a shopping mall of choices, but the client's probably only ready to take one thing. Or another outpatient OT like had a list that she shared with her clients of like, here's what I can work on. What do you want to work on today? And that's a totally different skill set too. I do see the problem of if we set one goal in the traditional like insurance models, then it's hard to really vary from time to time with what the client needs. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds like a hard balance. What do you think? What do we need? I don't even know what my question is there. Let me give me a sec.
I have a comment. I feel like,
go.
Yeah, I can sometimes read your mind, but
yes.
I feel like when with any kind of client interaction, whatever their goals might be, whatever areas of dysfunction they might have, whatever areas they're looking to improve, usually all of those are so multifactorial, right? There are like so many elements there. And so I think by opening the door to say, okay, what might be our starting point today? That doesn't mean that you're not working towards, so let's say in a more traditional structured setting, there still is a way, I think, like to align those. It just sometimes requires a bit more effort and energy and like capacity in a way that sometimes maybe a person doesn't have available in that day for whatever variety of reasons. And so I think they're not like mutually exclusive. And so that's how I try to approach it in my clinical practice is, I might have a plan. I might know based on my clinical, evaluation, what I think where they need to go, like what might be the most helpful. And then given the constraints of their daily life or whatever they have got going on, like I know it's not realistic for them to, let's say, engage in some like home exercise program with functional activity or whatever it is. And it's just figuring out, okay, I think that's part of our special sauce, right? Is like being able to modify and figure out, okay, maybe I really think that would be the best starting point for them. That's not going to happen right now. What might be some other place where we can start to help them, support them towards their goals? So.
Yeah, I think this is a bit interesting to me because most of my work is in the community at sort of a community level, thinking about organizations. And when you go out into an organization, there's so many people involved and you just cannot expect what is going to happen in a meeting. You can have an agenda, you can have some general attempts at like what we want to get through, but invariably there's somebody who will come in and just like drop a big problem or a new issue or something from the community that no one knew was about to happen. And you really do have to be flexible and nimble. But that's where we talk about like multiple plans and sort of like this mall analogy or this menu analogy, almost having that in your brain as you go, I think is something that we're having to make sure practitioners in whatever setting are really prepared to do, where you don't walk in with your recipe and you do that. You walk in with a menu of recipes and then probably modify those as you go based on the experience and what you're hearing from that particular group. And so we tend to sort of do those check-ins, right? When we're meeting with an organization and talking through the different changes they want to see implemented in a program, and say like, is this making sense? And then they're like, sort of. And then you modify and you change and you get more feedback. And so I think that in a good way, almost volatility helps us to be better practitioners on our feet and think through things in a creative and critical way, rather than just coming in with a set structure.
I love hearing both of you describe that. I love like flexible thinking and being agile on my feet, but for some reason in my OT work, I love the comfort of walking in with a plan. And I think that's why as I hear as I'm in these interviews and I hear how agile people are, I'm like, oh, that brings a little discomfort to me because I loved my plan. And I'm not, I don't know, I don't even feel like I'm like that in other areas of my life, but there was a comfort in that. And this is a different skill set to be more agile. It sounds more fun. It sounds more dynamic, but it sounds different.
Well, just to say, I love a plan. You can
Yes.
you can talk to any one of my master's students or PhD students, and they will say he loves a plan. But it's sort of like I've always called myself a percher. I like to perch on a plan, and then when something knocks me off of it, I start flying again and find the next perch. And sort of like, but I need to be able to perch places so that I can rest and sort of figure out what I'm doing. But that plan is like the first place. And then you sort of move into what can I change? Did it work? Did it not work? And you modify from there in a pretty pragmatic way. But you got to start with a plan, and maybe have like 3 plans just in case.
I want us to all be picturing ourselves as birds.
In addition to that, I think that requires some grace with ourselves. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, you go in and you have some kind of menu, you've perched, you have some possible ideas. And even then, when you're trying to make adjustments in the moment, things may not go beautifully. And that doesn't mean you're a bad practitioner. It's a growth opportunity. And that has been a learning for me throughout my years of practice. It doesn't mean anything about me, as a person, as a professional. It's just you cannot plan for every possible scenario. You just cannot, So, I think allowing some grace there is really important.
Another thing I hear from clinicians thinking about the treatment time is that they do not, the clinicians who I get to talk to, they do not shy away from the discomfort of trial and error and the discomfort of growth. And they're thinking of it as these are a necessary part of neuroplasticity. If there isn't enough level of challenge, there's not going to be change. I think as I left OT school, I maybe wrongly heard set the client up for success, set the client up for success. I saw my job as creating this pleasant plan of events, but managing the discomfort of growth is just a theme that I hear among these really good clinicians. Is that true? Do we need that discomfort? Is that, I don't know. Yeah. What do you think of that?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think both as therapists and the clients that we work with, it's navigating those growth edges. And I think an important part of that is the partnership piece, the collaboration piece, And so when we're working with clients, they're supported by us in that collaborative role where we're pushing them or encouraging them or helping to guide them, just outside of their zone of comfort for progress. And if things don't go well based on our, maybe our selection of menu options for that day, that's okay. And it's still a safe space. And still some learning has happened, some progress has happened in some way. And I feel that way personally for myself as a therapist, is finding a community of colleagues, friends, and supports who I know can help me kind of navigate that when I'm feeling, disappointed in how something went, or, I'm thinking I should have approached something differently, et cetera. It's all about that community, I think.
I think this also relates, and I'm going to put my theory hat on for a second, and how we conceptualize the therapeutic process and how we conceptualize occupation as a thing. Because when we see sort of occupation as this thing that we have to achieve, or this success, or a specific performance that is something that we have to get someone to, then it doesn't allow us the dynamicness of occupation and the doing and the process through which people sort of emerge into doing. And so when we see it sort of through a pragmatic or even a critical lens, we can actually give ourselves that same grace because we're in that trial and error process. And it's almost like when something fails, it's still data for you. You still get to understand it more, and you can try something different or understand it. And we talk a lot about recoordination rather than sort of failure, in the sense that if something doesn't work and it creates sort of this problematic situation, you recoordinate. You figure out a different way to move forward. And something you did yesterday that worked is maybe not going to work today. And so even with evidence-based practice, there's going to be a client who that intervention does not work for because of some other factor, because they weren't necessarily included in the research study, or their experience wasn't. And so that is something we have to really just understand and recognize and move forward with that ability to, I think of a bubbling pot of water often, and how we're doing therapy is we're sort of always going back in and coming back out and moving forward and developing the way we sort of walk with people through the therapeutic process as sort of that bubbling process. There's never an end to it, but it's always sort of fun.
And I think that's a really beautiful way to think about all of this that can be applied to people at any point in their professional journey, right? Because I think that really can resonate with students, with recent grads, and if you're shifting practice areas where there's a trial and error piece of it. There's, an educated trials, based on evidence-based and, clinical backgrounds. But if something doesn't work out, it again, it's not a reflection on who you are as a professional. That's part of the process. And so I think kind of outwardly labeling it as that, rather than people presuming, oh, well, once I know enough, then I will know everything and I will never be surprised.
Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with an OB who was saying the same thing. Their OB, people who practice obstetrics, you can never know every possible situation of, how that's going to go. You just cannot. And so I think for some reason that people, and I think especially newer grads or, students think, okay, well, I'm just going to become an expert in this one area. I will know everything that there is to know about it. And so I'm nope, surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You'll always uncover. There's more to learn, more unexpected situations.
And I might just push back a little bit when there is a failure or something. It is a reflection of someone's professional skills, but it's not necessarily a bad reflection. And the fact that they are recognizing it is a really positive thing, right? Because sometimes we do need more education. Sometimes we did do something unsafe, and we need to recognize to improve those skills. So that reflection is really important for people to do, but it's not an essentialism of you are a bad professional. If you just sat there and said, that wasn't my fault, that would be a bad professional, and so the fact that you are reflecting and even thinking about and caring that something didn't go well means you're a really great practitioner and that you're really trying to move your practice forward in a positive way.
Agree 100%.
Another thing that I heard over and over again, and I have no idea where this fits in OT theory, but people who are practicing from all different practice areas are talking about their attention to their clients' nervous system and their sensory state, and really using that in their session, and usually closing the session in a way that feels good. Because at the end of the day, our clients need to want to come back to us. And I feel as OTs, we've somehow took all these things we learned about sensory and the nervous system, and then we're using them in this really interesting way. I've been thinking of it as giving the client a nervous system reset. And I've even put this into buckets of there are different types of practitioners and how they do that. Some do that through laughter. like Ryan and Kalia, you talk about hard stuff, but you like couch it in laughter, and that like makes you feel so good. And then there's people who really like the aha moment, like they love to push their clients to like do something they didn't think they could do, like, and that's such a good feeling. And then there's people who like co-regulate, like they use their state to like match. I don't even know what they're doing. I know that Carlin does this to me, like like
magic, Sarah.
Yeah, I know. And then I feel like there's a bunch, and then there's like manual skills that people use or breathing. I don't know, but it's all like in this like sensory nervous system reset. And it feels like everyone's doing it, but I've never heard anyone talk about that. And like the importance of the arc of a session. Like I don't remember ever talking about that in school, but it needs to like be challenging and then feel good. And like paying attention to the nervous system seems to be how we're doing that. Is that, I don't know. What do you think of that? Like that just feels like a theme. Am I making something up? Is that true? Like...
It definitely speaks to me. And I feel like has been from the beginning kind of an intuitive piece of my sessions with clients. So in thinking about this, like I don't know that it was taught to me.
Yeah, where'd you learn that? Where are people learning
right?
this? I feel like everyone's learning the same thing. Except for like me back in my practice. I didn't know that. Like where, yeah. Where's this coming from?
I could say it was from, it's been from my years of practice, yoga and, meditation. And certainly it has deepened through that work for sure. But I would feel like I gravitated towards yoga and meditation because of the same reason. Like, I don't know. I just feel like I've been drawn to this kind of like grounding, safe sensory space. I don't know, energy like my whole life, which is, I think, one of the things that drew me to OT is I felt like there was potential for helping people access that in a variety of different ways. So I don't know. And I feel like I continue to be drawn towards additional coursework and things that just enhance my existing skill set, like my bucket around that. I do think there are many pieces of this that connect with trauma-informed care and supporting just a creation of a safe space in all ways, like psychologically safe, environmentally, like physically safe. And I think we are really good at that through our therapeutic presence, through our active listening. You don't have to be a person with years and years and years of practice experience under your belt to be able to access those pieces. So I think some of the strategies that help ground people, help them become present and, in the room or in the session are simple. I'm using air quotes, like simple in that if we just help connect people with their breath, like that's going to have a really big impact, and people don't have space for that, or many people don't in their daily life. And so I think that's a kind of a tool that can be taught early on to occupational therapy practitioners that feels like practical and applicable, throughout their professional careers, and, people can really use. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually think that, occupational therapy practitioners love sensory anything.
Yeah,
maybe a little too much. I'm going to say it. Maybe a little too much. There's not a sensory solution to everything. But I do think, because we've sort of jumped into that, but I also think the sort of advocacy and movement around neurodiversity has really pushed us in this direction as well, and recognizing that often it's not the person that we're working with that needs to change. It's us. We need to meet them in that moment or in that experience sensorially. And so challenging the idea that we have to fix people or manage their sensory sort of experiences into something that is typical, I think that has challenged us to see how we can sort of sit into that relationship in a neurodiverse and neuro-inclusive sort of way. And so I think that has also really sort of, I'm seeing it even in organizational level work when we are sitting sort of, we don't go straight into a meeting, we sort of set the stage, we set the spirit of the room. And I'm not necessarily managing the actual nervous system of everybody in the room, but the social system and the culture
but
of
you
the
are.
space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're always managing it all. It's all across all levels, right? Well, and I was saying it's sort of all levels, nervous system plus social system. It's like we always have to think about. My job tends to not focus on the individual nervous systems, but almost like the social fabric of the organization and the group that I'm working in, and really attending to how like the space feels, like the atmosphere of the meeting, and recognizing that if people come in tense and there's like clearly conflict among organizational members or in the community, then we sort of have to acknowledge that, sit with it, and then we can move forward in addressing whatever is going on. And we may not get to the original goals of that meeting or that moment previously because of where sort of people are in that moment. So I don't know, just meeting people where they're at, both in a sort of atmospheric and neurological way, I think is something that is emerging as a stronger trend within the practice overall, so that we don't have such a top-down approach to how we're giving therapy,
Is there a balance, though, Ryan, between like, yes, I want to meet people where they're at. I don't want to fix them. But I think our sessions, there's like an arc and a flow that works. Like, what's the balance between like managing that flow and meeting people where they're at? And hopefully you're ending at this, again, spot where people want to come back and do more of the hard work. Like, what's the balance there? And what are our words for that? Like, did we learn this in OT school and I missed it? Like, this feels like the critical thing. And are we talking about it and I missed it? Like, who's the expert of this? Like, who's the expert of the arc of a session? Because that's what we do and we don't talk about it explicitly.
I think I talk about readiness a lot, and that's something we generally, we definitely didn't talk about organizational readiness, and that's something I'm sort of thinking about a lot more now than individual readiness. But I think readiness for like a broad spectrum, there's like a broad readiness of like readiness for intervention and like life change. But then there's also in that moment, are you ready to hear what I'm saying to you? Are you ready to like be with me in this therapeutic process? And so for me, it's when the person is ready to hear you, that's when you offer, hey, I think it's time for us to try and make some of the changes that you talked about wanting to make at the beginning of our time together. Are you ready to sort of take that step with me? And if they say no, then clearly they're still not ready and we shouldn't be forcing them. But if we've met them where they're at, we're meeting them both in their space and in their emotions and that sort of thing, and acknowledging it, but also giving them our own boundaries of, I'm here not to listen to all of your woes and challenges of life, but actually to focus on these 3 goals that we talked about at the beginning of our time together. Remember, do you want to do that? Or is this, that's the way I sort of think about it at the organizational level. When things sort of go awry, I try and sort of say like, hey, this is why I'm here, just as a reminder. Do you feel ready to sort of take that on, or are we shifting directions?
And I think I would also loop that into, again, like the trauma-informed care, kind of the ability for the clients to have choice where, you acknowledge, okay, readiness, and here's kind of what I'm thinking. And then maybe they could select like, yeah, but I'm not up for this one thing right now, but I do feel ready for this piece, I think that's a really beautiful approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this arc of the session, this is something I want to come back to and keep talking about. It feels like
that sounds like a book
our
title.
Language is that does sound pretty. That's like a pretty title too. Feels like something we're all doing and we need to be talking about explicitly, and I don't know who to talk to about it. Like, who's in charge of this, or I don't know who's the expert in this, that we can talk about. More conversations on that to come.
Yeah.
Can I throw something in here, Sarah? Feel free to.
I'm ready for it.
I just thinking about the arc of the session and just some of the conversations we've been having, and noting some of the significant kind of global challenges in the context of 2023, and just over the last many years, kind of the significant factors that are influencing people's mental health, their daily lived experience, their state of being. I think that there's something really important that connects that nervous system resetting opportunity at the beginning of each session or interaction, just to hold space to acknowledge that people are dealing with really heavy, sad, transformative issues. And so that we are not necessarily, like maybe we don't dive into all of those in a therapeutic session, but I think it's important to hold space to let people know that those are seen or acknowledged in some way. And I think that can connect with kind of simple sensory strategies or deep breath or something grounding to help people know, okay, you're here right now. And also there are all these things going on in the world. And right now, this is our time. How can we best, how can we be in this space together in the best way that might be helpful for you over the next hour or whatever it is. So I just kind of wanted to throw that into this conversation too, and thinking about the arc, making sure that we are connected in our starting point, present and aligned, so people feel that collaboration, that collaborative presence throughout.
Yeah, and I think it actually speaks to, again, sort of this broadening and sort of less isolatedness of the practice, where we don't see a practice that is in the clinic. We see someone practicing in a clinic, but the practice really considers the world. It considers the various things that are going on in our world today that might be impacting our the people that we're working alongside of in the therapeutic process. And I think that is also something that is newer for the profession, and really thinking broadly about both our role in that work on a global scale, but also thinking that, politics come into, and not just politics like big P politics of like elections and that sort of thing, but the political nature of everyday life is infused within the therapeutic process. And we're coming to terms with that, I think, because we always wanted to be a neutral sort of not really talking about the hard stuff profession in some ways. But now we're challenging that. And I think given 2020, what's going on now when it comes to war and violence, we have to recognize that a lot of that movement, it has to be sustained. And we're now having to make sure that it is sustained by really thinking through how we think about the way we practice in relation to those political realities.
Yeah, I'm always thinking about where the context and the environment fits in just like our traditional OT practice. Like, how does it, I know it's important, how does it come in? What does that look like in practice? And maybe like you said, Carlin, it might be as simple as like acknowledging that and holding space for it. Like sometimes it might be that simple thing. Sometimes it's taking really explicit action and having explicit conversation. I think that is the work of our profession in the next couple of years, to figure out how to make that tie more explicit, and to figure out business models where we can really do both. Like that so many of our business models are individual focused, but that doesn't feel like the future where we're heading. I don't know how we get there or what that looks like, but
community practice.
Yeah.
I will say, though, people often accuse me of being like anti-individual. And it is in no fact, I am not anti-individual. I just, and oftentimes I think you hear me talk about the challenges of individual practice. But I think it's really both, right? It's across the levels. And we're realizing that as a profession and building the tools and strategies that we need to be a collective advocacy group to change things, both about our profession, about the systems that we work in, and about the societies that we work in. And so I'm optimistic about our profession and the people and the ways that we are able to move forward as sort of an occupation-based profession. I just tend to focus on the collective and the community level, but still very much value and see the importance of those individual changes and interventions.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is important, to have people that, use their strengths at whatever, like you, that's fantastic that we have the Ryans of the world, who are kind of like focusing at that level. And we also need the people, focusing at the individual level and the structure, all of the different levels. Yeah, it all has to happen together. So I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. We just talked about the trends in the kind of the arc of the session, as we're calling it. something I wanted to touch on before our hour is up is just how we talk about occupational therapy. I got to do this fun experiment, I guess, where at the end of each podcast, I asked people how they defined occupational therapy. And the answers were all over the board. There is not a shared language. Usually it was like a story, like, I'm climbing a mountain. And I like, but each year I write a guide to what is occupational therapy, and lots of people read it. I usually historically have written it in isolation, but I wanted to say like my sentence out loud to you both and just get your feedback on it and hear what's missing, what you don't like, what needs to be expanded on maybe later in the page. Like not everything fits in the sentence at the top of the page. But here, let me find it so I can say it out loud. Okay, the sentence that I'm using this year to start 2024 may change. I'm saying in occupational therapy, you set goals, take action, and ultimately change your habits to change your health. I'm thinking of this sentence as something that lives on a website that's a marketing material. Basically, I'm hoping it's easy enough that a fourth grader could understand and connect with it. I like the idea of having 3 prongs to it. Like, here's the 3 steps that we do. And I really gravitated towards the words, like the word habits and changing your health. Like when I think of what people are looking for, I think there's just like a recognition globally of how much our habits influence our health, and people are looking like, who helps me with that? And I think that's something that OTs are really good at. Yeah. What do you guys think of that? What's missing? What don't you like? Should I totally change this webpage in 2024?
Go for it, Ryan.
Okay. Well, first off, I love the take action part. I think that that's something that a lot of other therapeutic perspectives and maybe even therapies and professions don't necessarily acknowledge, in that we are like the conductors of action, right? We are the doers. We are the people who want to mold and shape the doing. And that's really a superpower that we have that really is a really important part of our therapeutic process. And so recognizing that the client is actually taking action as part of therapy is a really powerful thing that we also can own as a focus of our own discipline and profession. Your health sort of hit me in a different way because I think there's a little bit of a broader perspective than just health. I think mobilizing occupation can change things even more than health. It can change happiness. It can change access. It can make people unhealthy in some ways, and it can make people sort of uncomfortable while still changing things for the better. And so, I think where health is a little bit narrow for me, because I just believe in a bigger power of occupation in some ways. And then the your is, again, a little individual for me, in that I think oftentimes we can set goals, take action, and change our habits to change our communities, our community health, our social systems, our broad sort of engagement in each other's lives. And I think that is often sometimes forgotten about when it comes to, even in some of the more typical settings we see practitioners in, we're seeing like a recognition that they have to take family into account. They have to take other people into account, not just that single individual who is given a single diagnosis by a health insurance company. And so I think that for me, those are really important parts. What I love is not in there is that a sort of a focus on getting to occupation. I really think that as much as we want to own like occupation as an ends, I have a lot of challenge with that, and really think of our superpowers as occupation as a means, and mobilizing occupation, and then occupation as a lens, and thinking about how we actually look at the way people do things and break them down and analyze them through activity analysis or whatever you'd like to call it. I think there's a lot of disciplines who might argue with us to say that they also try and get people back to their everyday living. and their everyday occupations. And so that's where I'm glad that wasn't necessarily a focus, because I think we often define occupational therapy with that in some ways.
I mean, I don't even know what I can possibly add to enhance that. I really think all of that is, it's really powerful to think about. I think a lot of people come to the profession or do tend to think about occupation and the impact in a kind of a more narrow way. So I think considering how it can potentially have the ability to improve access, enhance, like the bigger scale implications, I would love for more people to think about that, because I think that would connect with involving even more people to get, to participate in advocacy efforts across the board, if they really thought about like the ripple effect on that level. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I love this occupation as lens phrase. So thank you for that, Ryan, because I so deeply value that lens that I have, that I carry with me always, in whether I'm working with a client in my clinic, when I'm doing something with my daughter, when I'm out in the community. It's the way through which I view the world. And I love it. I love my special OT lens because it does hold so much power, and it's interesting, and I have questions. It makes me just be curious about the world in a different way. So if we can add that into your statement, Sarah, something around that, I'm on board.
Yeah. And I also just want to say, we have been obsessed with defining occupational therapy for many, many years. And I will say that I do think it's a little connected to our roots in whiteness and the need to make definitions and not allow plurality to really allow for that generative conversation among different ways of doing and being. And so there are lots of occupational therapies out there, and allowing those different occupational therapies across the collective that we are so wonderfully diverse can really enhance all the different occupational therapies. But one occupational therapy here might look very different and be defined differently. And so letting go of that need to really have like a shared language, I think will allow us to step forward into practice in a little bit more of a liberated way that gives us more sort of freedom to let occupational therapy be what it needs to be for the clients and people that we're working with.
I mean, that's mic drop there. Beautiful.
I love that challenge. And I've been thinking about, like, as I'm creating occupational therapy content, like on our website, we now have this directory, and you guys see all these amazing occupational therapists and what they're doing. And I just keep like moving that up the page, like get to that as soon as possible, because that's going to be what helps people understand what we are, and they'll find the right person for them that way. Yeah, I love all that, and I'm going to be chewing on all that. And I think one, do you even need to define it? Two, how do we like express the like collective outcomes and nature of our profession? Like, what are those words?
So one of the things that in community practice we have started using a lot is the tradition of oral histories and oral narratives, and telling stories to communicate the ways that people live and do together in powerful ways that aren't necessarily rooted in a Cartesian sort of like, this is this and this is that, but allowing the stories to come together as a collective. And so I think stories like you're putting together on the website of people telling their own stories of occupational therapy is sort of that collective way of defining it and recognizing and honoring that it's complex and it's not necessarily able to be put into one. That's how cool we are.
Yeah.
Is we can't be fit in a sentence. So, I think that's what we have to sort of acknowledge and give people the opportunity to give their occupational therapy narrative to the world in a way that allows them to define their practice and honor it in the way that it doesn't have to meet some criteria that ACODE has like passed down or something like that.
Oh, this has been like so fun and so fruitful. And I know I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time headed into this year. I wanted to, at the end, give just a couple minutes to say what we see as our predictions for the upcoming year. I'm hoping to do a podcast at the beginning of 2025 and have a similar conversation. What do you think we'll be talking about in January 2025?
Ooh. Carlin, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I definitely think, connecting with what we, touched upon towards the beginning is I think we'll continue to see OT practitioners pushing boundaries in unexpected ways, continuing to show up in different areas of practice. So you might, have a couple new categories on your directory, I would imagine, by this time next year. I anticipate that we will continue to have more people involved in advocating at all different levels. I'm not sure exactly what that might look like. I have some things that I'm hoping for, and from particular to my areas of practice. But I think that I'm, feeling like there are going to be some of those bigger level kind of macro level shifts. But it's so hard to say, it's like the last couple of years, there have been these big unexpected variables that have shifted, in a variety of ways, the landscape. So we'll leave one big question mark. I imagine there will be some additional large shift that might, ruffle all the feathers and throw things up. We'll see. But I think those are my big areas.
For me, I think that I expect to be talking about OTs taking a stand. And in a variety of different ways, whether that's for themselves to honor their own skills and worth, and maybe asking for a higher wage or getting the job that pays you more or that you are really passionate about, and caring for yourself as a practitioner to do the practice that you want to do. I see a lot of practitioners stepping into that. Or whether it's thinking about institutional change at the healthcare system, really challenging our healthcare to serve people better and be more accessible. I see practitioners, and I don't know if it's Gen Z or what, but they are coming up hot and they are ready to make some change. So I'm really excited. Or whether we see, we're talking about continued political advocacy, both for the profession and other issues that are happening around our nation and globe. To make sure that we are stepping into places that we need to be stepping into in intentional and thoughtful ways to really pursue justice. So I see OTs taking a stand a lot more than I have in the past, and I'm excited to see how they do it in 2024.
Well, I just want to thank you both for all your thoughts today, the way you are helping to sharpen my thinking, but also the thinking of many people in our profession. There's a lot changing, and that is challenging and it's exciting. And I think conversations like this give me so much just hope and energy for what this year holds. So thank you so much for just being here today and being willing to have this really big conversation.
Thanks, Hu, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you both. Thanks, Ryan.
Wow, you all, I so appreciated this opportunity to really dive in and sharpen our thinking on what is OT headed into 2024. I feel like this was one of those learning experiences that raised more questions than we found answers. But honestly, those are my favorite kind. And I'm so excited to keep these conversations going in 2024. I do want to encourage you to go check out our What is OT page on OT Potential. This is a page that is evolving, and I hope to have another conversation about this page again in 2025. And as always, I really want to hear what your thoughts and takeaways were from this episode. If you are a casual listener of the podcast, you can let us know your thoughts by giving us a review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to, or you can comment on our YouTube video. But the best place to really discuss the implications of this discussion is in the OT Potential Club. I'll be watching for your comments in our forums, and I just love the discussion that happens in this special community. The OT Potential Club is also where you can head if you are interested in earning a CEU certificate for your time today. All you have to do is head to otpotential.com and sign in or sign up. And once you're in the club, you can take a 5-question test. And when you pass, we will generate a certificate for your time today. And as always, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this podcast helps keep you informed and inspired as an OT professional. Take care, and we'll talk next time.